killing it. You are killing me.
I'd like to welcome everyone to our first of two joint board meetings of District 65 and 202. And I'd like a roll call, please.
Ms. Chow?
Here.
Ms. Cartha? Here. Mr. Rickes?
Here.
Ms. Garrison? Here. Mr. Brown?
Here.
Ms. Phillips?
Here.
Ms. Quattrocki?
Here. Before we go into our regular board and superintendent comments. Oh, sorry.
Yes. Could we get a roll call, please?
Holt?
Here.
Livingston?
Here.
Metz?
Here.
Parsons?
Here.
Sills?
Here.
Savage Williams?
Here. Thank you.
Okay, before we move into our general comments, we'd like to take a moment to pay tribute to Deborah Graham, former District 202 board member. And she died on Friday, and her services were today. Many of you, we saw you there. It was a beautiful service, one of the most eloquent and honest tributes I've heard from brothers and sisters and children. And Eric, I'm sure you have a few words about her service for the board, and then I'd like anyone else to feel free to say a few words about Deborah.
Yes, Deborah passed away at age 58, and way too young. And she was such a vibrant and engaged person. She served on this board for a full term and served until the spring of 2013. And during that time, it was a very productive and important time in the time of the school district. That was the time when we were really debating and trying to figure out what became the freshman restructuring. And I really admired Deborah and appreciated working with her because she took that work so seriously. She didn't go into it automatically thinking, well, this is just something that we're going to do, and as a board member, I'm just going to coast along and we'll do it. In typical Deborah fashion, she sought out a lot of information. She worked with not only colleagues on the board and with people within the district, but with people in the community to trying to seek to understand as much as she could about it. She was a highly educated person, a Harvard graduate. She had a background in journalism and English. She worked in law firms and actually did some groundbreaking work in those firms in terms of communicating about legal issues. So you can imagine how she applied that same intellect and knowledge and inquiry as we were examining that issue of restructuring. And having worked with her so closely through those 4 years and at that time, I know that it was not until very close to the night of the vote that she made her decision. And she did in fact vote in favor of that night and got to see what has come about since then following that really important and in many ways historic vote. One of the things I remember about Deborah is if 100 words would work, then she knew 200 words would work better. Why not try 1,000 words? Let's be clear about it. And I remember all the board members came that night with a statement prepared to talk about their reason for making that decision. And I will tell you that everybody made lengthy statements. But I'm guessing that Deborah's probably equaled everybody else's on the board combined that night. But it was so beautifully written and it was so beautifully crafted and she had thought through the issue and everything. And so I have that image of her that night speaking from her heart, because in the end, Deborah always spoke from her heart. Yes, she had the intellect, her head was working on it, but it came through her heart. And that night, and so many other things that I dealt with Deborah on, she communicated very well using words, but very well using her heart. So, Deborah, you were a friend. I know that we bonded. I felt that closeness, and even after Deborah was off the board, we got together sometimes when she was at that point unable because of her health to drive. I would go over to the house and she'd be standing out on the corner, and I would pick her up, and we'd go to a local eating place, and we would have the lunch, and I'd always block out an extra hour or hour and a half because I knew that it wasn't going to be a fast, but it was always meaningful. And I'm sorry we've lost her.
Any other board members?
I'll speak. So I did not get a chance to work with Deborah and serve on the board with her, but I got to know her during the campaign. As soon as Deborah found that I was running for school board, she gave me a call, invited me to coffee, and I was impressed by her care, her passion, and her sincerity about the issues before the board and the community. And certainly that was a campaign where we got together a lot. In fact, I felt like our group really kind of bonded because we traveled through the community and you know, kind of knew each other's stories. You know, we could probably tell each other's 3-minute stories. Deborah always, as Eric said, spoke from her heart. She always was eager to share. I just remember that night that we were over at the board, over at the high school on stage, and how she just wanted to be the first to share because she had so much to share. I asked for a list of the committees that she served on when she was on the board, and that I was surprised that the committees were so many. So during her one term, from 2009 to 2013, she was on the Park School Committee. She was on the school city liaison representative. She was on Curriculum Forum. She was on Wellness, Professional Growth, School Substance Abuse Team, School-Based Health Center Advisory Board, ETHS Foundation Board, and PTSA. So in addition to that, she was a graduate of ETHS. She graduated in 1974. So her connection to the high school is long-standing. She will always be remembered at the school, and we will miss her. Evanston has suffered a loss at this time, and my sincere condolences to her family and her children and her husband.
Gretchen?
I've known Deb since before we were elected to the board together. I met her at this point now well over 20 years ago when my son was small and her children were smaller. Back then I was a practicing lawyer, a young lawyer, an associate in a law firm, and Deb was doing legal writing. She went on to write, I was reminded at her service today, a very long book, close to 800 pages. But at the time, she was still writing shorter articles for the American Bar Association, and in particular, an American Bar Association publication on women in the law called Perspectives. And at the time, women in the law and why there weren't more of them or more of them who were partners was a hot issue, as was the discussion around alternative work schedules, how lawyers could find time for family and work, and Deb was writing about all of that. And in particular, she was writing on the topic of part-time female partners in law firms. And I remember very well having a number of interactions with her at the time around that topic. and articles that she wrote that were certainly the work of a journalist, but she also had a point of view on that topic, and I think her writing was instrumental in impacting that discussion and debate in law firms in Chicago and really across the country. And it made a difference in my personal case because I was one of the first female equity partners in my large law firm in Chicago. And I credit Deborah with helping in that effort. But beyond that, I think that today everybody who spoke at her service she comes from such an amazing family, all very smart people, and the stories they shared today at her service were really quite remarkable and amazing. And of course, her husband Jim has been by her side for a long time. He's just a remarkable man himself. And I just want to also say that Deb's greatest legacy really is her very beautiful, darling children, Rebecca, Becca, who's now working in Philadelphia, Sarah, who I think is still local, and Natty, Nathaniel, who's a freshman at WashU in St. Louis, who were all there today, and Natty had remarks at the funeral. They're all ETHS graduates, and all have done very well for themselves, and I know Deborah would be proud of that. Her time on the board was always interesting, and it was a pleasure to serve with her for 4 years. Our meetings might be shorter without her. I think it's in many ways fitting that we're having a joint school board meeting tonight because she was passionate not just about issues affecting 202 but also 65 and very passionate about the two districts working together. So I think it's fitting we're meeting tonight, and I know we'll all remember Deb at various points as we continue to work with our boards.
That's it. I did want to mention that she also was active in District 65. She was a very active member of the Kingsley and the Haven PTA, and she was on the district differentiation and enrichment committee, the citywide. I also had a personal connection to her. I met her at Cherry. She was a co-founder of Cherry Preschool, and I met her when our children were young. And at the funeral, there was a lot of talk about her love of music and words. And ironically, when I met her, she actually hit my car and left a really long note about the fact that she'd hit my car, and then took me out to dinner to make up for it. So I remember going over to one of the first birthday parties, and I left the house so exhausted, thinking, I can't imagine a house so full of laughter and energy and just a wonderful time. I then got to know her on the campaign trail, and I was always amazed by her passion and her truthfulness. And I think I always most admired the fact that she was very fearless in saying what was on her mind, and she'll be missed for that.
I only got to know Deborah as a colleague when we both joined the board pretty much at the same time in 2009. Hadn't known her before that, and I very much appreciated from a very early time the passion, the honesty, and the energy that she brought to her work on the school board. And then as I got to know her better, and as was certainly confirmed today at that lovely funeral ceremony or gathering, that's how she was with everything. And it just, her energy and her passion for life was always like right out there on her sleeve for everybody to see. Her work on the school board was important, as Eric said. When we agreed, she was a great ally. And when we didn't agree, she was a formidable adversary. But one of the things I appreciated most about her was that even when we disagreed and argued and debated and all that, the next time you'd see her, she'd greet you just as she had if you'd have been agreeing about everything. It was all just business. And it was the same energy, the same warmth, and I really came to appreciate that about her. I know that her family and friends, her close friends, are suffering right now, and I just pray that they can see through their grief and begin to celebrate her life that she lived so fully.
We'd like to have a moment, unless anyone else has something to say, we'd like to have a moment of silence in her memory. Thank you. Okay, we're now on to the welcome to the board meeting and the board and superintendent comments. Eric or Paul, would you like to?
Sure.
First?
Let me extend the welcome as well. Just a few quick comments to celebrate some of the things going on around District 65. On October 30th, several of us had the privilege of attending the 30th anniversary celebration of the Golden Apple Awards. And our own James Schomburg, who's a second grade teacher at Orrington, was one of 10 educators honored for excellence in teaching. It was a fabulous evening. It was like the Academy Awards of teaching. And again, to Mike Koldyke and Pat Koldyke, who've invested in the Golden Apple for 30 years. It was just a stunning celebration of teachers and teaching. And it was really an honor. We had a table from Orrington. We invited James's second grade colleagues to join us, along with the principal and a few others, and his family was there as proud as can be. It was a wonderful, wonderful evening. I want to encourage you to turn on Channel 11 when you're not watching us here, between November 19th and 26th, because the airings of the ceremony will go on a somewhat continuous basis. So check your TV guide on that and celebrate with us the outstanding teacher that James has been, and really the outstanding teachers that serve us in both of our districts. I had a great opportunity to attend Betsy Quinn, who's our drama specialist and drama chair, her Straight Outta Shakespeare, which was a Haven production presented last week. And there were, I think we counted about 135 to 140 young people on stage. This was organized by the 8th graders. It was an absolutely fantastic set of sketches that were very deeply into the Bard, and indeed the crew, the lighting, the costumes were absolutely spectacular. It was just a wonderful evening in Haven, and I want to congratulate Betsy and all of her colleagues and all of our young Shakespeareans who are now part of the Haven community. We just finished up at King Arts. The 7th grade students did their annual Stories Alive presentation on October 29th, and this is a 9-year program. Over 9 years, they've celebrate and encourage emerging writers. The student ensemble dramatizes stories and poems written by the King's Arts community, and the kids, the young people, get to show off their playwriting and adaptation skills, as well as acting, directing, and improvising in 2 special performances. I want to thank Jamie Corcogrosa, and I'm hoping that I'm not butchering your name, Jamie, but for really helping the students bring their stories to life. And then finally, we're hosting, Eric and I and District 65 and 202 are hosting the annual Realtors Breakfast next week with realtors from Evanston and Skokie who come and join us so that we can show off everything that is absolutely fantastic and stunning about the 18 schools in District 65 and the one fabulous school in District 202. And we'll look forward to working together on that.
Well, I want to thank District 65 for your hospitality this evening. We always appreciate the chance to be over here and to have a meeting in your lovely boardroom with you. I think it's so symbolic that we are having this joint meeting because I think it so much characterizes the kind of partnering and collaboration going on between the 2 districts. I feel good about the superintendent's joint achievement report that we'll be presenting shortly. And I think it's just one more example of how the 2 districts are really looking for, developing, and taking advantage of so many different ways to work together. And whether it's joint purchasing or whether it's trying to map out and figure out legislative issues that affect those districts, or whether it's coordinating our calendars as we'll discuss tonight, or even far more important in my mind, having a joint reading goal and working so thoroughly and with such respect among everybody in the two districts to really accomplish even more for the students in our community than either District 65 or 202 could accomplish alone. Paul, I appreciate working with you. It's such a fine working relationship, but I know that others of you, whether it be board members or whether it be staff members I look at here, or whether it be content area people and teachers throughout our districts, I know that we are finding those opportunities and valuing those opportunities. So thanks again for having us this evening, and I know that tonight will be another good reminder of why we need each other and why our students need us.
Thank you.
I too want to thank you for welcoming us. It's great to be here, and it's really important. I think this is very important for us to come together, two districts coming together to do the work of supporting all the students in our community and really taking ownership in a really meaningful way. So I really, as I've read through the reports that we're going to hear tonight, I'm really excited about where this is going, and that we have moved past talking about what's needed to a place where we're actually doing some of the work that's needed. And in that process, of course, we recognize the work ahead of us. And sometimes it's a little overwhelming because we think, wow, we have so far to go. But it's important to realize that we've come pretty far. We've gotten going. We've gotten some very substantive work and goals here, and I think it's just the beginning of some really good work ahead of us. So the beneficiaries are the students and the families. So thank you again for having us, and I'm really looking forward to hearing more later.
Thank you. So welcome, and before we get started with Cradle to Career, I want to extend my thanks to the administration, because these last 2 years I have seen you all translate the theoretical goals of the board into these very real partnerships, and it's been exciting to watch. And I think we have 4 really, really meaty discussion topics tonight, which reflects how much work you all have put into it. So thank you. And we're going to start off, unless anyone else has some words of welcome? No. Okay, with Sheila Mary on Cradle to Career. But Eric or Paul, do you have the introduction?
There's an easy answer. Having a little PowerPoint issue. If not, just close
While Sheila comes up, let me welcome her and the Cradle to Career Enterprise to our joint meeting. I think it's actually, as we planned this, it actually works out really quite well, since the focus, as Sheila will discuss, on community literacy is something that is being engaged not only around this table, but throughout the community. And there's a very nice segue from Sheila's presentation on where Cradle to Career is and where it's going to our joint achievement report and our joint literacy goals. So I think the timing couldn't be better for you to be here, and we really want to welcome you on behalf of both boards.
Well, thank you so much for the opportunity to give you an update on where we have come since I last was with you on about my 3rd day. And we, I think, have come a long way. Many of you, we are extraordinarily fortunate that many of the school board members are actively participating in Cradle to Career, and we appreciate that so much. We are getting so much richness from what you're able to bring to us. So thank you so much for that. This is really complicated stuff. And I think we're learning more and more about how complicated it is and how challenging it is as we go along. But at the same time, I think we're making some real and exciting progress. And what I want to report to you about tonight is some of the key progress that we have made so far. As Paul mentioned, we have reached consensus on a primary target of community literacy, which I think not only meshes very well with the important initiative that the districts have undertaken, but really is fundamental to all of the issues that we are trying to deal with respect to cradle to career. As we look at the things that are impacting our young people's ability to be successful, this is so fundamental and one we have to figure out how we can change. And I think what Cradle to Career is able to bring is to say, this is not just the school district's problem. It is our community's problem, and how are we together going to solve this problem? So choosing community literacy as our first solution design team, we have developed 5 action teams. One is well-being, health, and safety, focused on what are the fundamental things that all kids need in order to be able to be ready to learn when they walk in the school door. Literacy on track. How do we make sure that kids are on track at each step? Parent and caregiver empowerment. How do we recognize that parents are absolutely their children's first and most important teachers? And how do we support them in being able to do their work? Prepared for adult life, which is focused on recognizing that if young people don't see some place that they're headed toward that feels real and legitimate and that they can imagine reaching, we're not going to be very successful in engaging them in really being successful around literacy. And finally, community supports. How do we create a community that supports literacy everywhere kids go? Whether it's church or synagogue, or it's or mosque, whether it's the sports camps, or how do we make sure everywhere kids go, they're being reinforced? Between this and our other committees, we have over 150 different individuals involved in one way or another with Cradle to Career, and over 40 different organizations, not all of which are program or formal program partners, but many of them are program partners. Each of these teams is on track for one major accomplishment by December 31st. And just to give you some idea of what they might look like, I'll tell you about a couple of them. One is the health, well-being, and safety team is focused on expanding the 311 phone system, which accesses city services, to also access social services around the city. So we've met with the 311 operators. They are on board and excited to take on this new challenge. We're going to run a pilot starting with housing options and how do we get people with specific unique housing needs, how do we help them access the services they need, and we hope that pilot will be up and running by December 31st, with an eye toward expanding it to more broadly to social services around the city after that. Another example is the parent caregiver empowerment team is focused on the 0 to 3 age range. And their initial focus is going to be on creating a texting program, accessing all of the participants in programs around the city to get them engaged in getting texting tips about parenting. Just little reminders. Have you talked to your child about shapes today? Or colors today, or just the sorts of things, because we know how incredibly important oral exchanges between parent and child is in developing the skills that kids will need to be the foundation so that when they show up at District 65, they're really ready for kindergarten. We've also made some significant organizational accomplishments. We have 6 new organizational partners and 4 more in progress. We have hired a PhD level data manager who will really get us going, and we are determined by our January retreat to have a solid beginning for our baseline data, and an MA level bilingual program manager, who is contributing tremendously already to our efforts. We are working with Gel Creative, a firm around finalizing a logo, messaging, and a website. We hope that website will also be up by December 31st. We have a lot shooting for December 31st. And we have 4 organizational support teams that cut across everything that Cradle to Career does. One is community engagement. How do we make sure this is really owned and a part of the fabric of our community, and not just something that's happening among the partner organizations? Data, how do we make sure we're using data in an effective and meaningful way to track our progress? Communications, how do we communicate this complicated initiative that's hard for any of us to really wrap our hands around, and my vision of it changes every day. And how do we communicate that in a meaningful way to our community? And then sustainability. How do we look at recognizing that this is a long-term effort? How are we going to make sure it's sustainable over the long term? This just gives you an idea of some of the new EC2C partners: Evanston Case, Evanston Own It, Literature for All of Us, Metropolitan Family Services, Rainbows for All Children, School for Little Children, and in process we have Baker Demonstration School, Child Care Center of Evanston, Erie Family Health Center, and the TheraPlay Institute. So that's basically where we have gotten to. We are planning to celebrate in January our accomplishments of December 31st and roll up our sleeves and figure out how we are moving forward and develop a very concrete plan for moving forward from there at a retreat in January. But I would love to answer any questions.
Questions?
All right. So, I guess my question is, when we're about to look at some numbers coming up, but is there like a quantitative goal that you can put working with the many partners to say that Cradle Career is successful because it has moved this number? Is that one of your steps?
That is absolutely. That's by the end of our retreat in January, we will have those measures, clear consensus across the effort about what those measures are. And then we want to track those on a regular basis on our website so that anybody can look at our website and see how we're doing against those measures.
Other questions? Candace?
Thank you, Sheila. This is obviously a really impressive set of partners, especially knowing that there are new partners coming on board. And I'm wondering, what's the discussion around roles and commitments as a partner? We were kind of fairly early in the game, but I'm curious that, beyond the financial commitment, what kind of are the underpinnings of what you talk about in terms of the commitment that a partner is making when they come on board?
A partner is committing that they buy into the values that are inherent in Evanston Cradle to Career, and we have those written out in an agreement that is part of what they sign, as well as committing to actively participate in committees, to meet at least twice, to be open to meeting at least twice a month, if their committee is meeting that often, on a regular basis, to give input, to be a part of the process, to share data when we get to the point where we're ready to share data, but to be to recognize that that's a key piece of what partnership is all about. And basically to stand up and say, this is a key part of who we are as an organization, that we are partners in cradle to career. It is a fundamental part of our work, that it's not something that's peripheral to our work, but it's really fundamental. So part of our process is we have to meet with the board of directors of any organization that is interested in becoming a partner, explain all of this, and then they sign a written agreement. Both the chairman of the board and the CEO sign this written agreement about their commitment to being a part of this process.
And in terms of private sector participation, is that too something that, I know we have a few, the hospital, corporate participation, I guess. Is that part of the plan for the coming year as well?
Yes, and it's something we have begun. We had an initial meeting. The Chamber of Commerce is actively involved. We have had a meeting with a number of business leaders. We do have business leaders on our sustainability team, but I think figuring out how to incorporate a meaningful role for the corporate community is something we're still figuring out.
Sheila, thank you for the presentation. Follows a little bit on Candace's question. I'm curious about how you're learning from the other cradle to career efforts that are in Chicago and nationally, and if there are any significant lessons or takeaways that you're pulling from those efforts, both in terms of things that you would want to incorporate here and things that are pitfalls that you want to avoid.
Certainly, I mean, it's one of the things we're so incredibly fortunate is that there are so many examples. And we have had I've had an opportunity, I'm part of a regional network of cradle to career, of collective impact efforts in the area, as well as we are one of the United Way neighborhood networks. That gives us the network of their networks. And I had the opportunity to go to an equity summit in LA, which brought together a significant number of collective impact efforts as well. So that's something we are really trying to take as much advantage of as humanly possible. I think certainly some of the things we've learned, that was part of my strong feeling that we wanted to focus initially and not have the 0 to 23, we're going to solve all of those problems on our first shot, but to focus initially on community literacy, because it gave us something that was important to all of us in one way or another, but didn't have us all over the map as we were working on it. So that, I'd say that was certainly one of the things we learned. We have borrowed from Thrive Chicago extensively because I was involved with Thrive Chicago. So we've borrowed the format that they used in helping to think through how you would structure the work. So we've had many opportunities to take advantage of that. I think the things that I have learned to avoid, I think were remarkably well built into the homework that was done in Evanston before I came on. I think the planning behind how this effort was set up, the investment that was required for partners to become engaged in partners, is really unique to any of the efforts that I've seen. And really, I think avoids a lot of the pitfalls that many of the other initiatives experience that suggest a lack of a lot of involvement. That's not to say there aren't things we have to learn. There are lots of things we have to learn. And Candace and I actually both attended a session at Northwestern at Kellogg about collective impact this past week. And it had wonderful reminders of how we need to use data and how we need to think about influencing and changing behavior. So there's lots to learn, and there's one thing I'm very clear about is I don't know it all, and I want to take advantage of everything anybody else has to offer from their experience.
Yes.
Also, let me underscore a little bit of what Sheila was saying in response to Jennifer's question. You know, if we think about the key transitions that young people make in their early life journey, transition into kindergarten, the third, fourth grade transition, moving into middle school, being successful landing in ninth grade at the high school, graduating from high school and moving on to college or work or other, the opportunities that they have. The young person who gets that first job or that second job and needs to be successful in this day and age in Evanston and Skokie, then literacy is at the heart of that. And what you started with, Sheila, I just want to underscore, we will do everything that we can and then some from both school districts to make that effort clear and understandable, but we can't do it alone. And the high potential of bringing together all of these organizations collectively, and this is the point about collective impact. It becomes lingo a bit, but collective impact is saying that we as citizens and residents of Evanston and Skokie, we as institutional actors, we as institutions can, if we come together on something like community literacy at these key transition points, we can make a collective difference and go back to Omar's question, have a collective bump on some sort of quantitative analysis that we would be looking at. So there's just a very important piece here with bringing all these players together. And I think what Sheila is arguing, that the team is coming together as a whole to do first accomplishments at the end of December and then to really strategically plan for the next stages, perhaps using some of the data that we're about to present, I think is going to be a really vital part of where we're at in the communities that we serve and where Cradle to Career is. So I just wanted to underscore that.
Anyone else? Thank you so much, Sheila.
Oh, and
Sorry.
so thank you.
I just wanted to say, Sheila, thank you for bringing up the history in the community, because there have been many who have worked on initiatives over time, long-range planning committees, who have yearned for something like this right now. I'm struck by the fact that Jeff Schoenberg in this very room suggested during a legislative forum some years back that we in fact incorporate all the capacity from all of the service providers that we have within the community to build jobs, to improve academic achievement, and to sort of facilitate this capacity building, which is really the building of our assets in the community.
Right.
And so anyway, I just want to thank you, because I believe your leadership is really heading us in the right direction. Thank you.
Well, I certainly hope so. And it's the most exciting thing I've ever been a part of, bar none. And I just think there is so much potential here. And I think the real difference of this effort from collaborations that we've all been involved in ad nauseum is this sense of, and I'll steal it from Evanston Own It, is that we all own it. That the idea that this is no longer, yes, we'll all come together and do whatever we do, but we all own the outcomes. And I think if we can stop pointing to the school districts and saying this is all about you, but it's all about all of us and what can we do differently, I think there's tremendous potential in this community of what we can accomplish.
Thank you. I also think what's so impressive to me, and tonight is really meaningful, these three initiatives that seem as though they were launched independently, the joint literacy goal, the joint accountability report, and Cradle to Career, the overlap is so incredible, because when I think about Peter working on the kindergarten readiness forum and the kindergarten readiness, and that's the work of Cradle to Career, and yet it informs so much of what we're doing with our literacy goal, and it's going to be measured by our joint accountability goals. So it's really a neat.
And it really was independent.
It was grand design. Someone had something on it, because it seems very well.
I think we must be right.
So thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, so now we're on to the Joint Achievement Report.
Why don't I'll kick off. And Eric, if you have comments in the bullpen there, and then we'll move to our colleagues. As we've said, and as many board members have said earlier, we're going to take a moment to engage and celebrate the joint work that we're doing, both on achievement and reporting about achievement, and on our literacy work. And we'll give an update as well on that. On the joint achievement report, and I'm going to briefly give just a couple comments and then turn to Peter and Carrie if you want to offer some comments, and then we'll segue into John and to Pete on the joint literacy. On the joint achievement report, what we're providing for you is both product, which we'll talk about in detail in terms of the achievement findings that we have along that continuum that I just described as Sheila was talking. And we also have process. And let me take just a wee bit of time on the process side. This is an important moment of showing how we can work together across both districts, how we can communicate not only as human beings but as data geeks that we are. And so that I think there's an important finding in the report that we can talk to each other in our data, and we can actually come together and actually generate work like this that will stimulate a lot of questions, a lot of what do we do next, a lot of how do we focus on the issues that are being raised. And so the alignment of data while we work together is actually very important. We also, in this process, tried a few new methods, and some of them didn't fly in the first drive of it because we wanted to make sure that what we present as statistical legs is really strong so that we can continue the dialogue based on the data that we have and that we can move forward. So I think part of this was a bit of experimentation, of trying things out to see what would work, what wouldn't work as we move forward. And I think as we hear a little bit about what's inside the report, we'll also be stimulated to ask lots of questions that then will be followed through by what we're doing in some of our joint work on the content or substantive side of our operations as it relates to literacy. So let me turn to Peter and Carrie and see what sort of comments you have on the joint achievement report. We may take a pause for a question or two, and then we can segue into the joint literacy goal.
Excellent. So I'll get started with our conversation, and I think we have basically 3 things planned for you. I'll start and just give you some high-level overview of our process-related findings. Then I'll talk about kindergarten and grades 3 through 8. Give Carrie a chance to talk a little bit about the high school age work that we did, and then we'd like to turn it over to John and Pete, who can go a little bit deeper into the interpretive summary that you'll find in the report about what do we see behind these numbers and what are the actions that are already underway and that we plan to have underway to address some of the findings that we found when we started looking at all this data. So just to start out in terms of process, I think a couple of key things that we learned in our working together that are really positive for us as we move forward are that there really weren't any technical barriers to connecting our data. When students leave District 65, we're already sharing their ID numbers with the folks at ETHS. They get stored in those databases, and so we didn't have any technical problems matching our students up in order to do the work of finding out what happens when they leave District 65 and as they move through their career at ETHS. The other thing I think that we found is this is the first time we've worked on a report like this, and we saw a lot of alignment between the metrics that we're using and a lot of the methods that we would think to use as well. And so it was great from a process perspective to find out that we had so much in common in terms of our data and our way of working that we could put this report together. Then just at a high level in terms of what did we find in trying to answer the question about students' learning and performance and literacy, was that we had a high level of consistency in our metrics and in what we see in student performance across all these grade levels. So as you browse through the chart that's on page 3, you can see both for students overall and when we break things down by student income, that whatever grade level we're looking at is very similar to the other grade levels. And so that gave us confidence that the metrics we had been using in District 65 for our strategic plan scorecard and in our accountability reports were really well aligned with the ACT measures that the high school has been using. And so that was also good for us to find as we got into this work. So let me start then in terms of a little bit deeper level of detail by looking at kindergarten. I think that's the data in this report that is probably newest, in that we haven't reported any of this publicly before. And so let me just take 1 minute or less to give you a sense of what this metric means. We have a test that we give to kindergartners during their first month of kindergarten. It's made of 5 subtests that teachers administer one-on-one with students. And those 5 subtests are about foundational literacy skills that students need in order to be successful in building skills in reading comprehension over their course of the early grades here at District 65. So we assess things like alphabet recognition. Can the student identify characters in the alphabet? Phonemic awareness. Do they know the matching between sounds and letters? Whether they can listen to a story and respond to some basic questions about that story. And if you look in the appendix to this report, you can see more detail about what those specific skills are. The test is normed against students across the state. And so essentially what we did is for each of those 5 subtests, we looked at the score that the median student or the average student across the state would have on that particular skill when they come into kindergarten. And we created a provisional on-track for kindergarten readiness measure by saying what students master 4 or 5 out of these 5 skills. So if you come in at that benchmark level in 4 or more of the skills, then you have a really strong foundation on which to build learning to read as you enter kindergarten, 1st and 2nd grade. And you can see in that chart that I showed you on page, or referred you to on page 3, what the results of that look like, which is that about 54% of our students in the most recent kindergarten class came in mastering 4 or 5 of the 5 skills that were assessed by their teachers. And then when we break that down by the students' free reduced lunch status, about 72% of those children from higher income households come in kindergarten at the state benchmark in 4 or more of the skills, and 26% of their peers who do qualify for a free or reduced price lunch enter having mastered 4 or 5 of those skills. And so as you look upwards in the grades as we talk a little bit further, you'll see that that pattern persists throughout their careers in District 65 and District 202. The last thing I want to point you to before I turn it over to Carrie is to the analysis that we've done in grades 3 through 8. Paul alluded when he introduced this topic that we did a lot of trying of different things to see if we could come up with our own measure of being on track in grades 3 through 8 using our MAP data. And what we found out is that it was harder than we thought, for one, but also that the metric that we were already using in our strategic plan scorecard actually seemed to fit best with both looking at the methods of how the data were put together and what the features were of the student body in our context. And so you can see reported in page 3's table the results for each grade from 3 to 8 in terms of whether students are on track in reading according to their MAP scores. And those are based on the same metric that we're currently using in our strategic plan scorecard. So with that, let me turn it over to Carrie to make a few comments about the high school data.
Sure, I'll just briefly explain how we analyze the data at the high school. We looked at 4 graduate cohorts, 2011, 12, 13, and 14 graduates, and we looked at their 8th grade MAP reading scores and compared it to their grade 11 ACT. So it's the ACT they took in grade 11 that all students have been taking. We estimated the likelihood of students reaching the ACT's college readiness benchmark in reading based on that 8th grade MAP. We took these probabilities, we created a probability model, we estimated, we validated it on our current 2015 graduate cohort and 2016 who've already taken the ACT in their junior year. So we validated our model on that, and our model held up. And so then we took these probabilities, our estimates, and we applied it to our current students, the current 9th, 10th, and 11th grade students, to estimate the percent of students who were likely to meet the college readiness benchmark in reading based on their 8th grade MAP scores. And those results are in Table 3 that Peter was referring to. So with that, I'm going to turn over to Dr. Davis and Mr. Price to talk about the implications of this report.
Great, thank you. Let me start by echoing something that Tracy said, that in these 3 initiatives that we've heard about tonight, Cradle to Career, Joint Accountability, and Joint Literacy, we also don't see these as 3 separate work streams, but as parts of our work that really reinforce and support one another. I'd also like to share that what has been set forward in the Joint Accountability Report is a very high bar. This is not a report about basic proficiency. This is not a report about grade level standards or average. This is a report about the percentage of students that are meeting very high college and career readiness benchmarks that have been established by norm studies from across the country. And so we're setting a very high bar for our students and for ourselves. From the report, we take a great sense of urgency. There is a tremendous amount of work to be done that is in front of us, and in fact, this is a systems challenge. Every one of us has an important role, and it will take the very best that we have for our students in order to move the percentage of students that are at college and career readiness benchmarks across our 2 systems in the city. Tonight we're going to talk about some of the joint work that we are engaged in, and also some of the separate work that each of our districts are taking on. And let me talk a little bit about the work that District 65 is doing that was alluded to in part of this report. First part of that is around our Tier 1, or our general curriculum for all students. We are working on developing frameworks beginning in mathematics and literacy that will define and align high quality instruction and supports for all students and in all classrooms. This will be a major step forward in helping us to create a coherent system, improve coherence and communication across our district, and implement supports and measure our success and our progress. We can't really measure fidelity if we don't have a definition of what our curriculum and what our instructional models should in fact look like. Those frameworks are a tremendous amount of work, and I think will benefit our district tremendously. Also, in our work around disciplinary literacy that we've initiated, and as part of our joint work, again, is to ensure that all of our instruction and all of our curricular areas is rigorous, that it's engaging, and that it's challenging for all students. So really pulling from the top of our curricular approaches and making sure that our general approach for all students is very challenging for the children that come to our classrooms every day. In addition, we're working very hard this year in alignment with our strategic plan on providing additional supports. Ms. Savage-Williams mentioned some of the additional work that is needed, and in fact, many of our students do need additional supports. And so I think our strategic plan outlines some of the very important steps that need to be taken in order to improve outcomes for all of the students in our district. We have some work that's been initiated in 3 of our schools around culturally relevant pedagogy, exploring what it means to have and to address the needs of a diverse student body. We are working on strategies for our English language learners, a group of students in our district that we need to ensure are ready for high school and ready for college and career while they acquire content knowledge and the English language simultaneously. And a response to intervention, or Tier 2 supports for students who need additional support reaching the grade level standards in college and career readiness benchmarks. So we're working with pilots across our district, new instructional approaches, as well as reinforcing the instructional approaches that we know are working to engage our struggling learners. And again, this is incredibly, it's really engaging work. It's very rewarding work that we're doing. This year in our joint work, we are focused on beginning the work and the articulation between the 2 districts in social studies and science. bringing together teams of teachers to look at those two content areas, and looking at the assessments that we use, formative and summative assessments that we use in those two areas, going more in depth into the social studies in this year, and then setting the stage for science. Dr. Davis, you can.
Sure, I can jump in. We're very excited about that work, actually, that work around assessments and that work around expectations. We've talked a lot about owning this, and just, the answer to the question from kindergarten through grade 12, how many students are on track for college and career readiness in reading? It's about half are on track to meet the college readiness benchmarks in 3, 8, and 12. So that's a important number to keep in mind. So we own it, and I think that's a huge step. It's a huge step to sit here and hear Cradle to Career, John, myself talk about how we own these numbers, and these are ours, and we own this issue. But the question is, for us, is like, what are we doing now? It's a 12-year goal, right? It's a multi-year goal, but and what I liked about what John was saying is, like, he talked about what we're doing now. So I'd like to elaborate on what we're doing now, because there's a real sense of urgency here. So we're using at the high school the STAR reading assessment to assess all of our students in grades 9 through 12, and we've talked about that here before. But we're also using the student growth percentiles now on STAR to monitor student progress, which is a really nice way to look at our students meeting growth targets and how are we doing. And our teachers have access to that data, and they can do interventions. There's been extensive professional development on that. We have a dedicated, last year we talked about educating our leaders, right? Educating our department chairs, educating our instructional coaches. Now we have a dedicated professional development module on Mondays on literacy that is co-facilitated by our reading specialist, Kiwana Brown, our associate principal for instruction and literacy, Scott Bramley, and a professor from Northern Illinois University, Mike Mandarino. And they work with teachers. They work with about 50 to 75 teachers on Mondays, select Mondays as part of our professional development offering. And that's, again, really, really important. And that's around disciplinary literacy. One of the things we're doing now, we have over 100 students enrolled in our Reading Enriched course. These are students who are come in below the 40th percentile in reading. And we're revising that curriculum. We're revising that curriculum with our reading specialist and a team of teachers to make sure that that's the very best intervention it could possibly be. We're also partnering with Dr. Carol Lee at NU on literacy and culturally responsive instruction. She's done some work with our whole faculty, and she's going to be doing classroom observations. And again, all of this complements, all of this builds a synergy. Because we're really committed to supporting all of our students, and we're willing to do whatever is necessary. And we're very interested in one of the questions I get is, how's the high school going to help K2? And I'm open, John. I will do whatever it takes. I know John and I have talked about sitting on like an advisory sort of curricular review board for that, kind of going through what's happening, so there's an awareness at the high school level, but also adding some of our expertise, which isn't really at that level, but definitely a need to know. And we're actively participating also in Cradle to Career on both the Literacy on Track and the Prepared for Adult Life action teams. We continue the alignment of work with middle school to high school. We talked about that a little bit earlier. But this is all very important. And one of the final things I want to leave us with is the developing of a scope and sequence of skills and content for every course within every discipline as part of this work. And that speaks to what you're doing at 65, and we can build that pipeline right through the high school. So we can all take questions now.
Thank you.
We have a conversation.
All right. I'll open it up to the board first. Doug.
Thank you for a great report and thorough report. And obviously there is cause for concern and urgency. But I just want to understand, looking at that chart on page 3, If we look at 2016 ahead to 2025, across the board, our projections are falling on the percentage of students that will be career or college ready. So could you explain what's behind that and if I'm reading that right?
Yeah. So let me just clarify your question. I think you're saying that as you look down the column of grade levels in the all column, that percentage gets lower as kids get younger.
All and then free reduced lunch, across the board.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I think that you're seeing a couple things. One of which is a little bit of a measurement artifact, which is that the further you get away from 11th grade, the harder it is to predict whether a student will be college and career ready. And so what you're seeing here for 11 through 3 is all data based on MAP scores that students have taken as opposed to the 2016 where it is actually the ACT. So the 2016 is sort of the certain outcome based on students actually, and also 2017, the certain outcome based on students who have actually taken the ACT. The other data points are based on MAP scores that they took in 8th grade or before. And so as I look down this column, I definitely agree with you, that's the trend I see. I don't necessarily think that means that what we should expect is the percent of students scoring on 22 on the ACT is going to go down. But I think it means that as you go back further, it's harder and harder to predict whether a student will actually achieve the outcome. And I think that that's probably some of what you would see here. And to Dr. Davis's point, I would say, when I look down this column, the first thing I see is about half in terms of a consistent trend rather than a downward trend.
I have a question. Good information. Thank you for sharing this with us. Not always doesn't maybe look the way that we would like it to look in certain subgroups, but at least it gives us data and a starting point so we know where we need to go. My question is in regards to the kindergarten information, so the K grade. What are we doing to help the kids that are entering into the district? Because I'm assuming once they get to us at kindergarten, that gap, if we're not able to get ahead of it, it only increases. So what are the kindergarten readiness supports and programs or activities or meetings or committees? What are we doing to try to prepare our kids to be ready for kindergarten? Which is one reason why Cradle to Career is so critical, I know.
Absolutely. So the end of your question would be the beginning of my answer.
Right. I gave you that answer.
Thank you. And so our work with Cradle to Career certainly is going to be an important piece of that, and reaching out to all of the preschools in the city to gather as much information as we can about the students who are entering kindergarten. I think, as you know, Monique, we have a focus on supporting our youngest learners through summer programming and our partnership with the Y, which is incredibly valuable and important to us. I think the most important part of our work is the work that's being led by the Interim Executive Director of Curriculum and Instruction, Stacey Beardsley, to focus on our kindergarten through 3rd grade curriculum, defining and aligning what does our curriculum look like, what does it need to look like in order to provide the supports for all of our students to take the excellent instruction that we're seeing across our school system and make sure that we have the correct supports in place. We also have really dedicate the vast majority of our intervention and additional support resources to children who are in kindergarten, 1st and 2nd grade during the school day. So with our early childhood assessments, both the ISEL, the IDEL, and the DRA assessment, we're able to track very carefully and assess where are our students when they enter, where are our students mid-year, end of year, and track that progress over time. So what this does not show is a cohort analysis and how students grow year on year.
Okay. So can I ask a even more pointed question to follow Monique's, and that is District 65 has an amazing opportunity with the advent of the 5-year Head Start grant for both early Head Starts and regular Head Start. So you've got 500 children. It's almost its own natural experiment. I'm curious about, I've been asking questions repeatedly, about what curriculum is being used in the 0 to 3 and the 3 to 5, and what's the handshake with that curriculum with the D65 curriculum? Could you speak to that a little bit?
See, Joyce, do you want to take that? Answer the question.
Well, I think that we've been using the Creative Gold curriculum in early childhood for a while now, and that's a recommended curriculum that by the state. There's a lot of regulations that are related to the Head Start grant, and so we are following through with the regulations that they are suggesting. But as part of this grant, we're certainly looking very closely and assessing what we've been doing and where we may need to make some changes. 0 to 3 is an area that I agree we need to take a close look at in terms of how we have been working there and what's going to be our assessment procedures. But these are good points and areas that we want to look at carefully.
I want to build off of Monique and Jennifer's points because this is where I went as well. And just to share some data to put in context some of what we're seeing here tonight. So in District 65, we know that about 80% of our students enter kindergarten having participated in half-day early childhood programs or full-day early childhood programs. And so when I compare that 80% to this 54, I see there's an opportunity there if we're not only looking at our curriculum that we have for programs that we control, but there's also got to be an opportunity if we can have providers align so that those 80% are all coming in with, even higher literacy skills than they may be getting today. Now, so I think that's one area we talked about during strategic planning was how are we going to have those providers align in a way that's different so that we have children arriving even more prepared for kindergarten. Obviously, the second issue is making sure that all of our children have access to early childhood education. Because we did see in our own achievement report that there was a significantly different level of achievement for kids who had half or full day early childhood education versus none or home daycare type of programs. Those children did not do as well. So I think that's something we really need to focus on in a different way, and I think it's in alignment with at least what District 65 has talked about through our strategic planning process.
And it goes back to the point that John made that our focus on K3, actually it's Monique's question, our deep dive on K3 is actually really important so that as children land, so we have to, step one is as children land in our kindergarten programs and go to kindergarten 1, 2, 3, we have to be on point on how we're actually helping those children succeed as they continue on. And again, secondly, to pay attention to what we can do as an institution, working with partners in the community and with our own early childhood programs to be able to prepare kids so that they can land well.
Ken?
I have one related question to this conversation and then a separate question. And so I want to understand if what I want to do here is look at the value add of education, start to finish. So what I see is 54% from the input side, no pun intended, and then 55% on the output side. Is that a fair inference to make? Because I think we certainly need to work on, increasing where kids land with kindergarten readiness, but clearly, to me, the value add is of 1%. It looks like there's about significant backtracking really between that K3. Are those fair inferences to make from this data? Because I know, you're looking at ISIL, which is different potentially than thereafter from 3 to 11.
Yeah. So the short answer to your question is unfortunately no. It's not a fair inference to make, and there's a couple reasons behind that. One is that this is not a cohort analysis, right? So this is all the kids who are in each of the grade levels today, not a look at how those students moved from one year to the next is one thing to keep in mind. A second thing to keep in mind is this looks at whether students are on one side of a line in a distribution versus another. So there can be a lot of movement from a child who comes in at the 5th percentile and gets to the 50th percentile by the time they leave high school, but that's still not at or above the 22 that they need. And so there can be a lot of growth for our students that you wouldn't necessarily see in this set of measures. And then I think the third thing that I would caution is that while from the 3rd grade through the 12th grade, there is a predictive quality between the measure on MAP and the measure on ACT, this kindergarten measure is really a measure of foundational skills that are necessary, and it's not meant to be a prediction of how well a student will do later on in their elementary career. So I think there was another set of questions that we were really interested in that go down the line that you're describing about how do students grow, which would be to sort of a value add component. That would be a whole separate set of questions that we weren't trying to address in this first report.
Okay. I buy at least the last one. So that said, then, how do we move from this to? You talk about the diagnostic, getting to the point where the analysis is where we can start to be more diagnostic in nature around, where do we need to be focused as far as improvements? Is there more in this type of analysis, or is that based on what you were talking about, both of you were talking about separately in the other types of assessments that we do? So how will we collectively be looking at this to take the analysis deeper, or is that now we're going back and saying, okay, well where are we each going to work respectively?
Yes. I think the short answer again is so yes. I think both things need to happen. I think for our work in District 65, I think our strategic plan is the work that we need to do to move the percentage of children, especially for students who are receiving free and reduced lunch and students of color who are able to meet college and career readiness benchmarks by the time they leave us in 8th grade. I feel as I look through this report, as I think about the challenges in front of us, more and more confident that the strategies laid out in our strat plan are the right ones. And that is the most important work for us to engage in the next 5 years. I think it also means exactly the second part of your question, which is that we do need to continue to dive into analysis of this data and the collaborative work that the Joint Literacy Report represents. Does that answer your question?
And then I had one final, it's more data geeky question really for Carrie. I was reading in the roundtable about your accountability report recently that was delivered to the board. And in that, in terms of college career readiness benchmark for English, all students was around 74%. And so I know English and reading are not the same thing, but it was surprising to me that would be so much higher and reading be at 55%. So is there any way to, there you are. Is there any way to explain that a little better?
So the short answer is there's different subtests. There's 4 subtests in the ACT. There's the English, reading, math, science, and then the composite. There are different scores to meet college readiness benchmarks. So here we are looking at the reading college readiness benchmark, and that means students need to get a score of 22 or higher in their reading subtests. The English, the score is an 18. So there are different subtests. They have different scores where they determine what is or what is not considered college readiness. And we focus on English. English research has shown that English and math are the two subtests that are better predictors of college readiness than reading and science in the ACT. Hope that answered your question.
So would that mean that we should, I mean, obviously for the purposes of this, reading is important, but it's less predictive in terms of actual college outcomes. Should that make us feel a little better, I guess?
So the English is predictive of your first year English college, your entry English course. The reading is considered predictive of social science. So what it's predictive of in the courses, the college courses, those first year, freshman year courses are different. So this is not predictive of an English course by any means.
Thank you.
But we do know that English is a better predictor, period, because freshman English is a gateway course in college, and it is has the higher correlation to predictive success in college. So that is an interesting thing to see. But I appreciate the fact that we still are looking at the reading, even though we look very carefully at the English and math, I'll be honest with you. But I'm very thankful we're looking at the reading, because I really believe that we as a community, we as two school districts, we as Cradle to Career must get better outcomes in reading for children, period. Back to a question you asked a little bit ago, Candace. So we see the kindergartners at 54% college ready, and we see the seniors at 55, and what's the value added? Well, of course we know that 55% is, for seniors, is the ACT. That's a college entrance exam. And you're going to have to have gone a long way from kindergarten to be able to still be in that percentile when you're a senior in high school and you're taking a college entrance exam. So there's a lot of learning from kindergarten all the way up going on, in these classrooms. But we are seeing students coming to the high school who are not proficient enough. I'm trying to think how to word this. Have some big deficiencies in their reading, and I think that all of us know that a lot of their life outcomes are going to be affected by that. And so I really hope that while we see lots of strengths, and we do, the English is a good example, that we don't lose sight that we have to do something about the reading, and especially, there are all sorts of reading. In this room, there are different reading levels, no question about it. I know what I got on the GRE in verbal, probably why I'm an English teacher. Probably not everybody in this room got that on their GREs, but they're still proficient readers to some degree. What I worry about are what about those that are completely deficit. They are, reading in the lowest percentiles. They're in the high school and they're reading at the 4th grade level or the 3rd grade level. And I just think we really have to figure out what are we going to do so that everybody at least has the proficiency that's in a room like this.
I have a question that actually follows on that, and I'm so glad we're focusing on the younger grades, because I know we all realize it's so critical, but because we have both districts here, I think focusing on that transition between 8th and 9th grade is probably very important also. And I have 3 questions around that transition. And the first one dovetails with the Reading Enriched program, and I noticed the numbers here have gone from 34 to 65 to 100 in 3 years of those students ending up in the Reading Enriched. I'm wondering whether that is significant, and if we have any idea why that has happened, or if we've diagnosed that problem at all, because that seems significant to me, but maybe that's...
It's hugely significant, and it's creating massive challenges for us. to have 100 freshmen who are below the 40th percentile in reading and needing all this additional support and enrichment, yeah, thank you for asking the question. Of huge concern.
So I think what we've seen in our district is we've seen decreasing proficiency scores in reading for the past 5 years. So that is those are real kids who enter into 9th grade needing additional support in reading and in some cases math as well. So we take some hope from a reversing of that trend this past year in our 2015 spring results. But I think what we're doing is taking a very careful look. Again, this is not an 8th grade problem or a 7th grade problem or a 6th grade problem. I don't want to, we really want to look at our entire system and how do we align our supports throughout. I think that's why the best answer to your question, Tracy, is the same as the previous one, is the kindergarten through 3rd grade reading instructional framework is going to be incredibly important to make sure that we build that strong foundation from the earliest grades. That being said, we're also taking a look at the interventions that we're providing in 6th and 7th and 8th grade. Are we providing the best interventions available in the best way? So we're looking both at the very boring logistical issues of scheduling and numbers of minutes, as well as what are the programs. And this year are expanding the use of a program called Leveled Literacy Intervention that has seen great success in other districts and in some primary grades in our district as well, and applying that for students with IEPs and students who are needing additional support in our middle school, specifically at Chute this year.
Thank you. I know this isn't a cohort study, but another number that jumped out at me is the number between 7th and 8th grade, where we see a big jump in the white score, and then we don't see this, and it continues through ETHS, and it doesn't happen in our free and reduced and our other numbers. So I'm just wondering if this is actually a question, to be honest, that Jonathan really wanted me to ask, and whether that is significant. I know it's not cohort related, but is there anything diagnostically, again, that you think might be going on that we should be looking at because of that these take off in different directions? It's on the chart on page 3, and between 7th and 8th grade, it's just it's a 11 point, and I realize again it's not cohort, but you see this jump in scores that doesn't happen across the board, and if there's something happening there that we should be aware of.
I don't think this data would answer that question.
Okay. All right.
Yeah.
Okay, then my final question is, and I know this is the one I ask every year, and I'll do it again until I'm off the board, but the text complexity issue about 9th grade, I know we're focusing on science and social studies, and I think that's wonderful. We're getting the teachers together, but I'm just wondering when that's going to happen for our English classes, and when we're going to look at the text complexity issue in 7th and 8th grade and give the scaffolding necessary for some of these kids so they're successful in 9th grade.
We're looking at that. Lori Youngblood, who's our middle school reading specialist, is working very closely. We have 3 different PLCs, professional learning communities, that are operating this year. Text complexity is one of those. And actually, when you said you're going to keep asking the question, the first word I wrote was grammar. So also looking at that issue as well.
All right, well, I'm done then.
I wrote down grammar as well.
Okay. Sorry.
Are you going to go? You want to go? Gretchen? Go. Okay. So I think my fellow board members know that I'm a believer in using data predictively and evaluatively. It's a good tool. But I want to make a comment and then a question to remind ourselves about the comments that John and Pete said about urgency. And that, I've said this before, that 1 year in D65 is about 10% of a child's time, that 9 years in our district. And I think it's important to look at these numbers as percentages, but I think it's also instructive to look at them as actual numbers and to think about the numbers of kids that we have here. Because we're not Los Angeles, we're not Chicago. So if you took that 54% in kindergarten and divided it by the 7,700, you've got about 462 kids. If you divide that by the 12 schools, you've got 38 kids. And this is where I think really where the rubber hits the road is what are we doing with those kids and what are the diagnostics and the predictive things that we can be doing here and now so they don't end up in 9th grade at a 4th grade reading level. And that's where I'm really unclear, like, what do we mean by urgency? And that's my question is, what do we mean by urgency? What do we mean in terms of those 38 kids?
Your question, I'm sorry, Jennifer, could you ask your question again?
And maybe it's too rhetorical and it's not fair to ask you to answer it, but I think the question is, what do we mean by urgency when we're talking about having the number, like looking beyond just the percentages? I think this is really important and super useful information. But what it really means is that we can drill down and say that and this is just back of the envelope math, but in 12 schools, you've got about 38 kids per kindergarten that need our help. You can do that again at 3rd grade. You can do that at 6th grade. You can do that in 8th grade, and then in the pass off to the high school. But that's where I'm really unclear about what do we mean by grade level urgency.
I think what it means is that we have hundreds of educators coming to work every single day doing the very best that they know how to do. And I think it means that we have everyone in our district is focused every single day on providing the very best that we can for all of our kids. And I think we need to both accept that we're doing everything that we can and also accept the fact that we need to be doing better every single year, and every single year be trying new ideas and be working as hard as we can. I think that's what urgency means, is understanding that every person in our system is doing the very best that they can, and at the same time, we need to be doing better. There is no magic bullet. There is no easy answer. We're going to have to continue to work and work and work. And again, I feel very confident in the strategies that we've outlined in our 5-year plan.
And I think in the strategic plan, what we actually say very explicitly is that we're going to focus on the kids with the highest needs. And so what urgency means is deploying or redeploying resources for those kids. So if it's those 38 kids that we have to actually focus on, then we're going to have to think about where our budget lands in terms of providing the services for those children. I think what John has said and what the work that we're doing in conjunction with Pete and with 202 around our literacy agenda, we have a very particular focus on K 1, 2, 3, and we want to make sure that we do that. That's not good enough because we've got other kids who are going through the system. That's where our commitments in the strategic plan are to improving those children's outcomes in literacy and in mathematics. And I think as we move forward and as we continue to do what we have to do, we have to think about putting our resources on and our focus on those children.
So I want to shift a little bit. I know that this report is a great report, and what it's doing, and this discussion is clearly indicating that it's showing us what we have and what we need to work on. So it's really kind of showing kind of what we all know to be the case. And so I'm going to think about the 100 students at the high school, the 100 freshmen. Speaking of urgency, 4 years goes by really fast. So within 4 years, those kids are going to be out of the high school. So I guess what I want to know is within that time, realistically, what can we expect to see from that 100 kids that are functioning below the 40th percentile?
Below the 40, yes.
Yeah.
So one of the things that we've already begun to do is of course, we needed to open more sections of this course for students who are testing in the first quartile. We don't normally anticipate this number, but because we have the number, we allocated the resources to be able to do that. We're also redeploying some of our academic advisors or academic intervention team to really focus with the students on goal setting and doing a number of other executive functioning strategies to help the students make the transition better. We have also spent a great deal of time looking at the curriculum, looking at text, looking at supports, looking at Title I funds to see what kind of enrichments we can offer for the students, as well as looking at a long-term plan for redesigning the enriched course and the supports we can give to our teachers. So we have, like, right now on the ground plans that are in action at the moment to address the need, both short-term and for the long term.
So knowing that they were coming, so we were able to kind of put some of these things in place prior to their arrival so that we could be ready, or did we make adjustments once they got here?
A little bit of both. We anticipated what we could, but when the students got here, we knew that we needed to make some additional adjustments.
But I want to stress cradle to career and anything else that we can urgently do. I know this sounds like excuse making, and I guess it is, but when a child reaches the high school and is that far behind in reading, it's really hard to catch them up, to teach them reading that they haven't learned to do. I just want to stress that, I look into the faces of many of those 100 students, and, they know that they can't read like the other kids. They know that they're not getting the same materials or the same classes. They know that they're clustered together because, Marcus and I and Vernon, who's in the back, just had this discussion today. They end up spending the whole day together because they have to be in these special situations for English and for biology and for math and everything. So I just want to stress, we will do all of that and more. And we've added so many reading teachers and reading specialists, and we'll keep doing it. But we've got to figure this out sooner. And I'm not pointing the finger. I'm just saying, as a community, and I see Sheila back there. This isn't just one part of the problem, but it's a systemic problem, and we've really got to figure this out, because when you look into the faces of these kids and you know that they know, it's heartbreaking.
Right, and of course they know. Of course it's more than just a reading score, and we know how much reading impacts everything, but you're right. It's their confidence, their self-esteem, how they approach academics, how they approach this whole learning experience, what they think about coming to school. So it gets really, really all connected once they get to high school.
I think Gretchen.
Okay.
Two questions. One is, what's this report going to look like going forward? I assume we're going to sort of build out from here and get something that, builds on this sort of structure, and perhaps we're thinking about ways in which we can tweak the information to make it more useful. And then I have a question that's related to that, but I'm happy to hear your thoughts.
So the guiding principle of this report in general is that it comes from the superintendents, and they think about, they look at the districts and they have a question, and that's really what drives it. This time it was driven by college readiness in reading. I think for all the reasons we've talked about tonight, but I don't know what the next topic is. I do imagine, though, with the level of data sharing and the level of the ability for folks in both shops to kind of get together and work collaboratively, that we could certainly replicate this process in a different, more sophisticated way.
Well, the reason I ask is, so many of the questions that we've had about this chart, particularly this chart on page 3 is the one we're all focused on, return to the point that this is a snapshot in time and it doesn't trace the cohorts. So it would seem to me that one of the things we ought to be doing is developing the cohort so we can look at it over time. Which leads me to the part 2 of my question, and that is, with the exception maybe of that kindergarten data, can't we go back in time a couple of years now that we've got this framework or this structure and whatever work we did at the high school to kind of test the data that Gary was talking about? Can't we go back in time and come up with a couple of years so that we have a cohort that we can look at? And the reason I ask that is to address this question that kept coming up, which is this is only a snapshot in time, so we can't always draw the inferences that we might want to draw. But also, I think maybe more importantly and more positively, that would enable us to then target the particular spots where things look amiss. And to Tracy's point, Tracy/Jonathan's point about those middle school years. So I think, for example, obviously if we can only focus on sort of one area, that K through 3 is hugely important. But I gotta say, I also think that those middle school years are kind of critical, especially when we're talking about this issue from the high school perspective of kids not coming in at grade level. But I don't want to just pull that out of thin air. I want to have something to look at in the data that reflects it. And others have suggested, well, maybe there's something here, but it's only a snapshot in time. To know for sure, we'd have to do this, a little bit of time, at least.
So I'm going to let our data folks talk about that, but one of the things I think is critically important, Gretchen, is that this was up against a benchmark score, right, for each year. So it doesn't really, by its very nature, it doesn't do what you've described.
Because it changes.
Right, and also you're looking at a fixed point to go over, right? You jump over that point, and it's a binary that you made it or you didn't at each level. So, but yeah, good point.
So I would say maybe a first place to look in answering your question is that for the data from 3 through 8, these are all metrics that are part of our strategic plan scorecard collapsed by grade level. And so what we do know about the 3 through 8 is that in this most recent year in reading, the district was flat, and District 65 was flat for those grades 3 through 8. And in the 4 years previous, there was a fairly substantial decline in the percentage of students who were making these targets. So in the 3 to 8 space, in terms of thinking about our district as a whole over time, we know that we have seen 4 years of decrease followed by a year of being flat. That having been said, I think that tells us a little bit about the distribution of the population and not as much about what I hear behind your question, which is what do we know about the growth of individual students? And on that, at least for the 3 to 8 cohort, I think we can answer a little bit based on a measure that we use on our strategic plan scorecard, which is the percentage of students who are making expected gains. And that basically means, are you growing at least as much as the average student starting out where you start? And on that measure, again, we saw 4 years of fairly precipitous decline for District 65, followed in this most recent year with a reversal of that trend. And so those are two metrics that in District 65 we're tracking alongside one another to see how our students are performing in those 3rd through 8th grade levels. In our Achievement and Accountability Report that we'll plan to put out in January of this year, I think some of the cohort type analysis and that individual grade level analysis, I think we'll probably take some first steps on there for the students in grades 3 through 8. And then in terms of a longer term cohort, for this first report, we really wanted to make sure that we were establishing the right benchmarks. And so most of the effort really went into reviewing and analyzing that rather than having the opportunity to look at a cohort type analysis. But I think we've got a few places to start.
That's very helpful, and you do make a good point about your other reports that I don't see. I read about them in the roundtable, and I occasionally talk to board members, but it's helpful to have you articulate it while we're all here. And so that actually is a good segue then to a question I want to ask my folks back at the high school, which is, what are we doing around that expected growth, and how can we slot that together with what Peter Goddard, it doesn't help that you're both named Peter, Peter Goddard has just talked about. Carrie and or Pete?
I think that would be probably our next step is, so what we have right now is the ACT that we have at grade 11. So figuring out how to look at the growth from MAP to ACT is what we did. So maybe what other, I don't know what other measures we really have, but we would have to look at that and think about
Well, we've always
growth.
talked about in our goals that expected growth piece, and it's
Mhm.
a question of,
Mhm.
so it sounds like they're doing something like that in District 65, and we need to.
So the challenge is to have a measure each year that we could point to. And then, 9th grade, 10th grade, and then you follow a cohort through. The closest we have to that right now is our STAR, student growth percentiles in reading. That would be something we could down the road, look at and may address that. That's the cleanest thing. It's not aligned to ACT though. That's the issue, right? But if we do adopt a suite of tests, we could do it tomorrow. If we did the ACT, Aspire, or if we did SAT with their model, we could at least attempt to answer that question.
Thanks.
I just wanted to build on Jennifer's comment a few minutes ago about urgency and Dr. Witherspoon's comments as well, because I think what's really important to highlight is what District 65 is doing differently than we have done in prior years. And you hear us talk about the strategic plan, and for some people that might be a yawner when you hear, oh great, they have a strategic plan. But what's really different about this are a few elements. The first is how it was created. It was created with lots of input from people across the community, key stakeholders, and experts in areas that we focused on. It's a holistic plan. It's not just looking at teaching and learning, which is really important, but it's looking at other dimensions that support achievement, like community involvement and the school climate. And what we've done with that as a board and administration with input from stakeholders is identify what are the key areas that we need to focus on immediately, and also separated those from the longer term. So I don't know if you're all aware, but the board actually identified in the 5 areas of our strategic plan, there were areas of action and results that we expected to achieve each quarter. And that strategic plan and those results are the agenda for our board meetings. So we once a quarter, and I guess we've had one update so far, get an update on the actions and the results that have been achieved, if we're on track or off track, and what we might need to address. And that is a significantly different approach. It's very intentional, it's very methodical, and it's based on lots of good thinking of, I think, some very good minds from across the community. And so we feel the need for urgent change. We also have wanted to make sure we're putting the right foundation in place and we're focused on the right areas to drive that change. And I think with what we've put in place, we've set ourselves up for success. We haven't had that success yet, but I do think it is a very, very different approach than anything we've seen in many, many years in District 65. And so I think our board and many of the leaders across the district are hopeful that we will start to see some real change as a result of all of that work and thinking. So just wanted to share that because I think that's really important context for what District 65 is doing differently.
Thank you. Great point, and I appreciate the good work that's being done by boards and staff. I guess I want to take a step back on this the reading enriched, the number of students going from 34 to 65 to 100. And I'm just curious, I've heard about the interventions and the response. What I haven't heard is, what do you think is behind that? What caused it?
It's a great question. And I think we're really trying to, I think it's, again, there are not easy answers for why that may have occurred. And I think what we're really trying to do is continue our ongoing analysis of what's happening in every single class, 6th, 7th, and 8th grade, and make sure that we have the best resources and the best programs and the best tools in place to support our educators and to support our students. I think that what we have identified as the key strategies building upon a culturally relevant pedagogy in all of our schools, improving our formative assessments and the feedback that we give to students and to parents, increasing our supports and aligning our supports for English language learners, focusing on our response to interventions, our Tier 2 interventions for students who are not yet at grade level. I think those are some of the pieces that we feel like we need to see in place in order to reverse that trend.
I guess and thank you for that. I'm wondering, do you see something happening outside the schools or inside the schools, or a combination of both?
I think what I need to focus on in my role is what happens in our schools in D65. Sure. That's my job. So I'm going to continue to focus on what's happening inside the schools and inside our classrooms. That's our locus of control. I think that's our calling as educators in the district.
And yet, your question is a good one. It goes back to what Peter Goddard presented in terms of the kindergarten indicator, that children are landing in the district. Half are landing with the skill set that would meet the benchmark and half are not. And so that's a clarion call for us to do what we were discussing earlier, which is to work with many of the providers in the community and our own staff at the early childhood level, and to really focus and double down at the early grades. That's one key piece. The second part of your question is a really important one too, in thinking about where does learning occur. Well, learning occurs in our schools, in our classrooms, in the classrooms at ETHS. It also occurs in the wide variety of organizations that Sheila brings forward, not only before and after school, but in summertime as well. So how do we as a community actually focus on the type of learning enrichment that has to occur to support our children, especially those who are lagging behind? And I think that's a call for all of us to be working hand in glove in the environment of cradle to career to really leverage forward what is, again, a clarion call to all of us in the community.
I want to first say that I actually think the college readiness benchmark is the correct benchmark. It's not a too high benchmark. It's, I would say, what every parent expects the school to produce, their kids to produce. And even if their kids don't go to college, you still, to be a blue-collar job nowadays, you still need those same skill sets. So I think the benchmark is the correct benchmark. I would say, first time I saw the numbers, it was sort of sobering, and it was sad, and it was scary. It was a lot of feelings. But at the end of the day, I think it's an opportunity for the community. And I really think that this is, I know everyone here is working, the board is working, the administrators are working. I think we really need to find out how we can touch the community. And you sort of asked that question, Doug. It's a community problem. It's not just the schools. We have to figure out how to get in households and really make a difference. And whether it's kindergartners or third graders or 12th graders, we still need to impact every one of those kids in their home, where they are. And I know that costs money, but we need to figure out a way, because when I look at it, this is like it's 4 districts here. 202 is 2 districts. There's kids that are doing it and there's kids that are not. And 65 is 2 districts. There's kids that are doing it and there's kids that are not. And you can, cut it and say it's the ACT or whatever you want to say. At the end of the day, it doesn't look good. And I think we need to educate our community on what this is and how they can make a difference in each of these kids' lives. And it's not just us, it's everyone. And so.
Thank you, Omar. Claudia.
I think my career as a teacher in District 65, because in the middle school, sort of is coincidental with the getting better at these scores, and then when it started to trickle off. And I know that one thing, and I don't know how you figured this out, but with No Child Left Behind, there's a great deal of emphasis on focusing on those students who were just about there. And so we had after-school programs, and we had summer school, and we had mentors, and this is in District 65. We had tutors, and there was like, for all the teachers, it was like the message was, get those kids that are on the boat, get them and pull them up. And then the next year, find the next group and get them and pull them up, because, and it wasn't all the students. We weren't getting all 38. But I would say we were getting 20 of the 38. And we were improving their scores. And then, and I would say it was about 5 years ago, if they're still teaching, it kind of changed. That emphasis kind of went away. And that was, a leadership kind of thing. It was just different. You weren't encouraged to do that anymore. There weren't the after-school programs. There weren't the summer school programs for the middle school. That all kind of left. And I just think it's something to look into. What did we do with the curriculum in 65 in the middle schools at that point? There were significant changes, and you could probably find out what they were. We changed, and that whole emphasis on getting those kids and pulling them up went away. So we can fix that. We can go back to having that kind of message. Now that wouldn't take a 4-year study to do. It would just take, encouraging our teachers to do what we used to encourage them to do.
I think strategies like after-school programming, like summer school programming, are important strategies. I'd want to think really carefully about a bubble strategy, which I would not agree with or support, and I don't think shows sustainable results for kids. I think what tends to happen in the research around those kind of bubble strategies, you get kids over the hump, and then the next year they slide back down. And so I think really what we need to focus on are sustainable, high-quality instruction, Tier 1, Tier 2, Tier 3 sustainable strategies that are going to lift all children and provide students with the input, with the supports that they need. So I wouldn't recommend a focus on just the children who are just below. I think that's what Pete is alluding to when he talks about this is one bright line and there's a binary code here, either you're over it or you're under it. And a reason why in our scorecard we focused on expected growth for all students and how we improve that.
I guess I wasn't saying we should go back to the bubble strategy. Great. I guess it was basically making teachers more aware of those who need the extra support, and not in sort of classifications like Tier 1 and Tier 2, but more in, these are the students you have in your class,
right,
who could probably do a lot better. And here are the things that we're going to help you do as a teacher to get those kids to perform better. And so it isn't really, it's making them faces as opposed to a cohort or, a tier. And having those supports in place that teachers can access to help them. So.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And I didn't mean a bubble strategy.
Great. We're on the same page. Wonderful.
Any
Thanks,
other
Claudia.
comments or questions?
I have one. I'll just close it up. So I applaud the teachers that are trying to meet this challenge day in and day out, because it's not an easy task. And I believe, as Omar does, that it starts way before kindergarten. That's just my belief in how we partner and figure out how to work with the community and those child care centers and those at-home daycare centers. I know that's outside of whole K through 8th or K through 12 range, but it's critical because I think, as you mentioned in your report, it sets our kids up to be more successful if they're able to enter as such. So, however we can do that, because I think we have to start, and you know this, you're a professional at this, you all know this, but we have to start thinking about or tackling this issue in a different way. And it sounds like you have some strategies in which you're doing that, but we really have to start thinking differently because we're not advancing as such, especially in certain subgroups, and we know that they're not all entering the same way. So how, we try to figure that out, or how creative, or maybe others that need to engage in this conversation to just so that it is more inclusive will be critical in the success all the way from kindergarten through 12th grade.
So I really appreciate that, and I want to just reiterate what Richard put on the table, that the strategic plan that we engage the community in is really about a holistic approach to how we make improvements for the young people in our schools. And it's a District 65 strategic plan, but it's actually singing to 202. And we talk about school climate and the importance of school climate. We talk about the importance of social and emotional growth, because that's a key component on just decision making and being ready to learn. We talk about parent and community engagement and involvement. And we know that beyond our classroom doors, we have to reach out. And we have to reach out not only to the many, many parents who are very deeply involved, but those who are not involved. And we have to go where the parents are to be able to engage and engage them. And so that's again, as Richard again put on the table, part of the very focused and very clear intentionality of the strategic plan, that teaching and learning has to be at its highest level. We have to improve, and that we can do this. We'll take the responsibility, and we won't make excuses inside the system, and we will reach out and work with the community to make those changes for the better of our kids.
Great. And circling back to Cradle to Career, I encourage anyone to come to the Blue Team meeting, because that's where a lot of these conversations are going on about how we build that bridge between the pre-K and the community and kindergarten. And they're fascinating and really rich conversations. Thank you, everyone. Now we're on to our calendar discussion. So we might have a changing of the guards here. Does anyone need a break? Okay. Last spring, we brought the topic of the calendar up, and we, as a board, talked about giving guidelines to the joint committee about some of the major dates, like the starting dates, spring break, and winter recess. The boards both said we didn't feel like we had a good enough read on the community. We needed more input before we could talk about these. So we have now gathered the survey data from both District 65 and District 202. And I think the intention tonight was to talk about not the particulars of either of the calendars, but some general guidelines that we would like to give to the committee, so when they do their work this year, they don't come back to us in the spring and give us the calendars that don't conform to what we have agreed upon, even if we haven't articulated it. So the major dates were the start date, winter recess, and spring recess. And this might be a very short conversation, because it looks like from the information provided today that we're in agreement for the next 3 years on the start date. Is that the case? Well, that's good. Okay, we're on to... No. And are we on agreement for the winter recess and spring recess as well?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, so I think that was kind of the discussion we're going to have, but it sounds like we're aligned on those major dates. We could go on to talk about holidays, or we could just say this is good and move on.
Seems pretty good.
Okay, good, and move on. Right. We're now on to our legislative update. Well done.
Great report, guys.
Wow, thanks for the best timing.
Did all the work. Poor John.
John's back.
Thought you had a break.
He was hoping that.
Okay, since we lost how far back. We'll take a 2-minute break while we Okay, so we're on for the legislative update, and Paul, would you start?
Sure, I'll be happy to start, and I don't know if Eric wants to chime in as well. I mean, I think as both districts and both boards are looking to the future, we know that there are a great degree of uncertainties at the state level that we have to cope with and confront as we go along. The budget uncertainty that remains right now and will be resolved at some point, but we're really not sure when. Given that, both districts have provided some background information on the potential budget threats if indeed there are changes at the state level, if indeed there's a pension cost shift, if there's a new formula that will reallocate funds from districts like both of ours to districts that don't have as much resources. And indeed, if there's a tax freeze, which is a potential strategy that is talked about, a property tax freeze, if and when the governor and the legislative leadership actually meet with each other to make some decisions. You can see the impact on both districts. These are real impacts. And so we are concerned. We are looking ahead as best we can. We're working to engage our communities. Eric and I are about to convene a conversation with some superintendents locally who are in sort of the similar boat to us in terms of the burden that they may feel if these legislative moves and if the state moves in this way. So in many ways, we are on top of what we can be on top of in a very uncertain time. I've said in this panel before, I feel many times like I'm bowling in the fog because we don't know what's ahead of us, and we are trying as best we can to be planful, to be transparent to the communities, and that's what we're doing by providing this speculative information right now as we move forward. So we'll work together with our superintendent colleagues, our fellow districts who are close by. We'll continue to monitor everything that we can monitor at the state level and make sure that the boards know and our communities know what's happening. And as we both separately and then come together, but as we separately prepare our budgets and our projections for the future, we'll be very transparent on where we are and where we're going. Eric, do you?
No, I think you summed it up well, and it is a common issue of our two districts.
Gretchen?
So I just want to chime in as a footnote to everything that Paul had to say, and I think that was just a great way of summarizing an otherwise very complicated issue. I want to direct everybody's attention to a slightly later addition to the board packet, and so not everybody may have had time to study it, and those in the audience should take a look too. Included there is a PowerPoint presentation, which is, believe it or not, a shorter version of a longer PowerPoint presentation considered by the EdRed Executive Board in the last couple of weeks. The idea behind this presentation is to come up with a conversation starter for an alternative to the SB1, SB16 legislative models, which would negatively impact our districts so severely. Under this new idea, and it's really just sort of a rough framework, very much in draft form, I want to emphasize that, EdRed takes on the adequacy point, because that's something that has been really a sticking point for not just our district, but many other districts as well. So this model makes assumptions about an appropriate foundation level for schools across Illinois, taking into account things like the low-income population of a district, English language learner populations, and constructs a rough foundation level. It also takes into account some other things that have been taken into account, but to a lesser degree, things like regional differences in cost of living for our district. It's more expensive to live in the Chicagoland area, for example, than downstate. We pay our teachers more here than the schools do downstate. There's also an assumption built in here, not one that we necessarily agree, one that frankly we disagree with regarding the pension shift. So you'll see that here. It's not something that our districts are willing to accept at this point, but it's part of the conversation. The key point in this kind of a model is that districts like ours would benefit from a hold harmless position, which is to say money would not be removed from our districts, but we would not necessarily gain any more money under this kind of a structure, but we wouldn't lose in the way both SB1 and SB16. You know, the most extreme level has our districts losing some $8 to $9 million. So, and this is in line with the model that we've seen in the state of Massachusetts. If you really want to get nerdy about this, and you can go look there, they've operated with a hold harmless model that has poured more money into education across the board. So it's worth taking a look at. This is something that we hope will prove to be a better starting point, and we only had the preliminary presentation at the EdRed Finance Business Officers meeting. Representatives from both our districts attended on Friday last week, and I'm sure there will be more to come on all of this.
Just one friendly amendment.
Yes.
When Massachusetts had their model of equalization, which was passed, they were funding they had funds that were about 105 to 110% of their regular funding for education. In the state of Illinois, we're somewhere between 87 and 93%,
Right.
depending on what the year is. So
Good point.
the fully funded and then some is what Massachusetts did, and did a very nice job of distributing resources to those who have great needs. And
Right.
we're
Not
a clip
quite
below that.
there. Yeah.
Any other questions? Thank you, Gretchen. And thank you for keeping your eye on all that.
Will we not have more conversation on this from the standpoint of having the public understand that as far as equitable funding in public education unanimously through the state of Illinois, that we are in a position to encourage our legislature and especially our governor that we must find a funding source for public education, and that the development of the revenues that we need for this raise great concerns in many people's minds as to what kind of responsibility we have as citizens to be able to educate our young people. So I think that as we look at this foundation model, we understand that there are ways that we can assess what school districts need, but we must understand that the state of Illinois has a responsibility, according to the Constitution, Article 10, to be able to educate all students in Illinois. So I guess what I'm getting at is that we can see that there are going to be more early childhood cuts coming down, that we are going to be more challenged even than what we have in front of us now, that we must work very, very concertedly right now to have the population of Illinois understand that the situation in the state of Illinois is in dire consequence. And that as important as it is for us to understand how we can raise achievement, we must also understand how we're going to pay for this. And this begs a larger conversation about responsibility on taxation and all of the associated reasons why we are where we are today. And I think that I believe that I, as a board member, am very concerned about how we equitably fund education throughout the nation. And so we must work very, very hard locally to be able to push Governor Rauner in a position where he can, in fact, develop a revenue stream that is responsible in order to accomplish this. So I must have my say on this at this point, because this is the most important thing we can do in order to keep our young people up here at the top of what we do. Everything falls down from there in a pyramid form. And if we don't have funding for public education, we cannot serve our young people and bring them to a position where they can be viable as adults.
Thank you, Ann. Any other comments? And I think District 202, you have some action items?
Yes, I do. So we are at our consent agenda, District 202 consent agenda, and that includes our treasurer's report from September 2015, approval of bills, approval of agreement number 5/15/13/29, personnel agenda, appointment to staff, support staff, and change in status, which includes stipends. Do you have a motion?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
Okay, moved in second. Can we get a roll call, please?
Holtz?
Yes.
Livingston?
Yes.
Metz?
Yes.
Carson?
Yes.
Sills?
Yes.
Savage?
Yes. Thank you.
All right.
So I move, or I guess not move, but we will adjourn. This 202 is adjourned.
And we will as well.
Thank you.
Thank you.